Things I want to talk to you about today. We're going to go back and we're going to talk about changes to the Intel community post 9/11. We'll briefly touch on COVID and the IC's response to COVID. And then taking kind of both of those, we'll look at, what lessons can we learn for competitive intelligence and what's next for our profession. A couple caveats. There are national security experts here in the room, and I'm not one of them. So I'm not here to go in depth into why national or the 9/11 and the intelligence failures, what we did or didn't do, or what led to 9/11. I'm here to just apply that. So I'm much a learner of national security, as many of you are. And I'm not here to be disrespectful. I'm not here to compare the tragedies of 9/11 and COVID, merely how we can learn from both of them to further our profession. Caveats out of the way, disclaimers, good. Why are we talking even about national security or 9/11? Well, hopefully as I go through some of this, you're gonna say, oh, that sounds familiar. Ooh, our organization does that. Ooh, we need to think about that. And hopefully you can make those connections to your business. So 9/11, it was a tragic event. It was a strategic event. And it was a mandate for change. And so 9/11 came to signify these things. Whenever you talk about intelligence failures, it was what? It was the lack of information sharing. We hear that over and over again. A lack of communication, poor imagination, poor creativity from analysts that weren't thinking outside the box to see this coming. Ambivalence towards warnings, some accountability for leaders that they weren't listening closely enough or they didn't take the urgency that was needed. Flaws in capabilities and community-wide structural limitations. And so that became the calling or the rallying cry, and that came out of the 9/11 Commission report. So big thing with that is it's not just a reorg, it's reform. And it's a reform to centralize leadership, to give more power to someone that didn't have enough power to begin with. It's a reform to information sharing, to move away from the bureaucratic structures and the complex policies so that information can get shared across. And moving from a culture, so transforming a full culture from a need to know to a responsibility to provide. A reform in priority setting to make sure that the requirements that we're actually working on actually match the priorities of the organization, of the country. And a reform in the workforce. So there was people leaving the IC after the Cold War, and the ones that were there were really good at the common enemy, going after the Soviet Union. But they weren't ready culturally, demographically, or linguistically to look at the new environment and look at the new threats. And so you have the workforce changes, the policy changes, and two, you have the structural changes. So multiple changes for different organizations, the creation specifically of Homeland Security, the Director of National Intelligence, National Counterterrorism Center. So all in all, over 260 organizations had been established or redesigned. Looking a little closer at Homeland Security, 2003, why are we looking at them? Well, they brought together 22 different organizations and they came under one function with a really strong, clear message to defend our homeland against foreign terrorist threats. Simple to say, easy to do, but really clear and crisp. The Director of National Intelligence formed 2 years later, and they're all about the oversight for facilitating collaboration across the IC. So they're leading the integration, the synchronization of collection, analysis, and counter intel, and enabling those to help with the issue of, the not listening to the warnings, making sure that the intel is timely and accurate, so that policymakers can make decisions. So making sure that we're driving both accountability and delivering that clear message. Other structural changes was building of fusion centers. So 9/11, you got 0, 10 years later, you have 72. The idea with these is to take intel analysts and frontline workers and law enforcement all to come together to share their threat-related information and use a unified incident command. so that they can expand their thinking, not just on one thing, on the counter intel, but all hazards in both a coordinated and collaborative managed way. So in summary, why did I talk about 9/11? Just real quick here. It was a strategic event and it was a mandate for change. Reforms have happened, many including organizational changes, the creation of DHS and the creation of the ODNI. 9/11 highlighted intel flaws, lack of information sharing, lack of creativity, ambivalence towards warnings, and structural limitation. All right, so the IC has got it all figured out, right? So they made all these changes, they're ready to go, COVID's here, we're gonna get it right. 35 9/11s in 4 months. Was this an intelligence failure? The former deputy says no. I don't see this as an intelligence failure, but rather a question of how to prioritize finite resources. A report came out that looked at, thinking about how to see how the IC performed during COVID. And one of the committee members talked about, the aim of the report is not to like call them out, but to get them to refocus strategically on where the threats actually are. And so this isn't a matter of the IC getting flushed with cash so that they can go fight this new war on COVID. They're like us. They got to manage their priorities now. They have to do more with less. And so Sue Gordon also talks about, with those priorities and those things they have to watch, it's a new class of threats. So they have to watch the pandemic now. They have to monitor human migration, climate change, disinformation, on top of what they already have to do. Things aren't going away. The Soviet Union, that singular focus is now multiplying across. And they have to watch those traditional threats of the great power competition, of political and military threats, of terrorism. So the IC got it right. No, they just did the best they could with the finite resources. And like us, they're doing more with less, and they're looking at those different new threats. So our response, I'm going to go very deep into how we performed here and how best we did. No, I'm not, because we're still in it. So we're still in this event. We're still writing those weekly reports that we started at the beginning of the pandemic. We're still trying to collate all this data and get everything faster. Why are we still moving this fast? Because our decision makers want that. Well, great, we're still in it, but we haven't even had a chance to process. We want to talk about reform or structural. We haven't had a chance to process. And you Google like COVID new normal, and there's, some people are like, we have to go back to the old normal. Some people are saying there's a new normal. Some say there's key takeaways. So we're somewhere in between all that. We don't know what we want. And that's with our lives. That's not even with our businesses and what we have to implement with our businesses with a new normal. So we're still in it. The industries hit hardest, those most impacted by COVID, are the ones that we rely on every day. The ones that every single one of these is how we got here and how we're all here together. Airlines, hotels, restaurants, energy, automotive, retail, they're all hit the hardest. They haven't yet recovered, and we work in them too. And so the things that we rely on, they don't have time to look and say, how do we reform and keep moving? Well, maybe there's some reprieve coming, or at least for the people that IBM surveyed to say, hey, what's your priorities for the next couple of years? And CEOs are talking about how they're looking more at their operational capabilities, not external gains. So it doesn't mean that CI is not important. It just means we get to take a look and get our house in order. We get to look at our internal operational capabilities. And hopefully that includes us. How do we look at our internal operational capabilities and where we fit within these organizations the way that the government did? So lessons for competitive intelligence. I honestly don't have the answers. Maybe some of you do, but the idea I just wanted to share with you is we look at what the government mandates were, or the government went through, and then some questions for you to consider for your own industry, and questions for us to consider as a profession. So, the comparison I made here is 9/11 was the mandate for change. And for our industry, COVID's our mandate for change. We looked at the ODNI and the DHS and how they stood up to, coordinate these complex threats. Have you had time to ask yourself, or when you're ready, think about how you're addressing those additional complexities? And does your mission align with the other Intel or Insights groups? Not does it align with the organization. You've proven how effective you are to work through COVID. How effective are we now at working with the other groups when we take a step back and see those other groups that are similar to us? How are we working with them to solve the common goal for our organization? How does our profession, how do we adapt to greater convergence and intersections? And what's our essential mission? I think we heard this from Paul when he spoke at the beginning about how we're evolving as a profession. Those things I shared about what 9/11 came to signify, think about how you can improve your communication, again, across, not up, but across those different groups. And I think the big part of that is, are you giving your decision maker the full picture? I think part of the challenge is this executive likes to go to that person, so he's going to get that answer from them. This one likes this one. Your C-suite's not getting the full picture. And that starts with us coordinating with those across our organization, not just going straight up. All right, so go make your fusion center, right? Go get that going. Big thing with that is just think, should you broaden your network of shared information? If we're a CI professional, what role would we play if we were in a broader fusion center? The need for, greater analysis and collection disciplines, moving from a singular focus of the Soviet Unions to the broader enemy. Do we have the right skills? What are the new skills that are needed with our profession? Are we positioned with the old enemy or for a new one? And the last one, just, what the IC handled with COVID, they have a new class of threats. Do we have a new class of threats? What are those new class of threats? So we've got a lot to do, right? But I think what we see is 9/11 wasn't resolved with the IC in a year. You can see here it took 2 to 4 years before DHS came to form, before the 9/11 Commission report came out, before ODNI was formed, because they had time from when that crisis hit to think about, what do we do now structurally? We've been in it for 3 years. I think we're getting out. We're all here, right? So we got time, but where is our point of reflection now? Where is our point of, we've come out of this crisis mode, come out of this crisis model, what will we become collectively as an Intel discipline? So I made this amazing book cover, so nobody steal this. I'm trademarking this, but we're all going to work together on it and think about, what if we had a commission report? What would our findings be? Not what's the feedback, not what did we do wrong, not what could we have done even better, but the idea of, are we structurally how we need to be within our organization and within our profession? So we look at our mandate, a very generic definition of competitive intelligence, right? The systematic and ethical gathering and analyzing of information about our markets, our competitive landscape, and general business. Do we reform our mandate? Do we reform our priorities of increasing revenue and earnings and market share? Do we reform our partners, structures, and resources? Why? Target, this should look really familiar because I was thinking of all the teams at Target that do insights, so yeah. So you think about this, there's all these different teams that either came up during COVID or came into having more power or more influence within your organization. And now they're focused externally. Groups that maybe didn't even focus externally as much, like HR or supply chain, were the ones that had to really now step up and say, oh, how are we going to get this product? Why is this sitting in the port for this long? Where can we forecast where we're going to get the new product? Or corporate security and risk management, they were in it every day, making sure that the leadership understood what was happening with COVID. And so you take any of these different groups that have this external focus, you put our mandate against it, and it becomes really similar. You take out the word market, you take out the word competitor, you replace it with supply chain, and all of a sudden you see that we become a lot more similar in how we operate and what we need to do for the betterment of our company. So what if that wasn't it? What if we didn't have all those separate teams? What if we became DHS and we had one primary function and it was corporate intelligence? If we merge, if we become this organization, do we lose our identity? We're melded into this competitive intelligence, and should we be driving it? We're the ones that have been around the longest in these other functions. Should we be driving this melding together? All right, so it's 2025. We've listened to the CI Commission report on how we can improve. And now we've got a chief intelligence officer. I think David from Proactive would like that one. And that chief intelligence officer now has those 17 functions under them. Our mandate is simple and strong as the message from DHS. We're here to protect and grow our organization. Our partners, Security Executive Council, RISC, SLA, law enforcement, SCIP, and our adjacent industry partners that we're not looking to get their trade secrets. We're looking to understand what information they have and how they're gathering it on the threats and opportunities in their particular groups. We super embrace data science now. We have an Intel platform where all these different groups are putting their information into one spot, that unified command. And our priorities are driven by the chief intelligence officer because it's the best priorities for what's best for the organization, not what's best for our particular function. So competitive advantage doesn't come from the competitive intelligence team. It comes from being attained through these combined groups of all these different groups, a new form of competitive intelligence. So we don't have to do all of this. I was thinking, is this a fork in a road? It's less of a fork in the road if we, think of do nothing versus enact all of the changes that we're going to bring out of our commission report. The spectrum of service that we serve across our organization, depending on what they need. And not yet, we're still in it, but there's going to be time for us to think about from the beginning of our profession to where we are now. Are we taking the time to look at and learn from the old versus the new? Not feedback for how we can improve, but how we need to reform. You guys, I kept us right on time. Look at that, 12:30. Thank you.